Okay, thank you, and it's a great pleasure to discuss this for very insightful and informative paper. And because you already heard about the main point made by the various speakers, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. And I just want to say that in my view, and so far in the current policy and academic debate about South China Sea, too much attention has been given to the bigger players like the major power, China and the United States. Very few and attention and actually paid to the interest and the calculation of smaller countries, which including the 4 countries which are the direct claimant of the South China Sea. Actually, their interest and the approach taken by them actually are very important for the future development of South China Sea. And normally in the current discussion, when people talk about those small players, and they simply assume they just have one simple, even if it's challenging dilemma, that is to choose between China and the United States. But the 4 paper, it seems to me, present a much nuanced and sophisticated analysis and illustrate some of the very complicated challenge and the balance those 4 countries, need to do. So in that context, I would commend, the presenter for, provide so much thought, so much food for thought. Okay, so we have 4 papers in this panel, and the first 3 talk about the 4 Southeast Asian claimant state in the South China Sea dispute, and the last paper by Chris is about ASEAN. So I will divide my comment into 2 parts. Firstly, I will comment on the first 3 papers as a group, and then I will talk about the ASEAN paper. The 4 countries, and it seems to me there are significant similarity and difference between the 4 countries, discussed in the 3 papers. And firstly, in terms of similarity, and all this country and has a strong, interest in South China Sea, and they are all dispute with China, and there are dispute between them as well. And the second similarity is that from the paper, and the South China Sea is significantly important for all the 4 countries, and in terms of in economic and security terms. But there are significant differences between these 4 countries. And the first difference is that, those 4 countries, they are different in size and different in their national power. And so understandably, another difference is that they have very different approach to their dispute with China and to their relationship with China. And but collectively, all the from the paper, and we can find all the 4 countries face tremendous challenges and to deal with the South China Sea dispute. And in my view, apart from the various factors mentioned in their paper, and in my view, and those challenges and dilemmas faced by the 4 countries actually fundamentally caused by twin fear and one hope. And so by the twin fear, I mean all the countries discussed in this panel and had twin fears, and has 2 fears which actually influence their calculation and approach in South China Sea dispute. The first is a well-known fear about China. They fear about China's growing assertiveness. But the second fear, which I won't elaborate on the fear about China, but the second fear, which is less discussed, is actually the fear of the United States. And that fear actually are more sophisticated and including several components. If we look at those papers in more details, we can find there are various concerns about the United States. The first concern is the fear of U.S. lack of engagement with the region. And if we look at Lucio's paper on the Philippines, and part of the shift in Philippines' approach to China after the award in Hague is largely because there is suspicions about the U.S. resolve to assist NC ally and by the current president. And also there is some views in Vietnam about the commitment and the durability of U.S. commitment to the region. So that's the first concerns. And the second fear of United States is actually the fear of U.S.'s excessive engagement, which will lead to regional rivalry. And so the Southeast Asian country, on the one hand, they would like U.S. engagement, but on the other hand, they worried about the negative consequences of the U.S. engagement. And on top of these two concerns about the United States, there is another concerns which I identified in the paper, actually, especially from Tuan's paper on Vietnam, is that actually there is a worry about, for the sake of its self-interest, the United States might engage and in the region, in a manner, have a good term with China, and then at the expenses of the interest of other countries. So there are three different concerns about the U.S. engagement in the region, the lack of engagement, the excessive engagement, or engagement in good term with China at the expenses of the interest of these four countries. So apart from those fears about the United States and China, actually, I think, not only we need, the region needs to press China to, to do more to assure the region about its intention, but also need to to ask the United States to provide greater clarity and big assurance to the region about its intention and future, policy. And in addition to these twin fears about the two great power, and also the calculation or approach taken by the four countries in Southeast Asia, and is also influenced by one hope. And that one hope is that they hope a cordial, good relationship with China will deliver immense economic benefit. So based on this, all Southeast Asian countries, the four Southeast Asian countries in the South China Sea dispute, they need to balance the relationship between China and the United States. The United States' various way of engagement, and they also need to balance their economic interest and their security concern. So in that case, the Southeast Asian country, the four Southeast Asian countries discussed in this panel actually face multiple dimensional challenges and various balance they need to make. So it's not just about the choice between US and China. So essentially, one thing we found from the full paper is that eventually, facing all these difficult, challenges, and all four Southeast Asian countries actually undertake a kind of programmatic approach and towards its dispute in the South China Sea with China. And that pragmatism not only reflect in the Brunei's and Malaysia's low-key approach to the dispute with China, but also even in the case of Philippines and to a greater extent of the Vietnam, and pragmatism has been the main element of their South China Sea policy. This is related to the issue about a question which asked by Andrew Barr in the earlier session, is that and how important the South China Sea issue exactly to the countries involved in the dispute. And it seems to me from those papers, the South China Sea dispute is just one element of those four countries' overall national policy and their relation. And it's not even the dominant one. So in this case, I think we cannot over or exaggerate the importance or significance or seriousness of the South China Sea dispute. And so that is my thinking about the first three paper. And for the second, for the last paper by Chris on the ASEAN's role, and essentially, and Chris provide a very clear and very informative analysis about ASEAN's effectiveness in dealing with China. I think there are two main points he made here, is that firstly, and actually, perhaps contrary to his own argument, what I found in his paper is that ASEAN actually can do something. And because Chris demonstrated in the early stage until recent, well, in the early stage of in the 1990s or early 2000, in the early stage of South China Sea dispute, and at several junctures, ASEAN actually effectively forced China to make concessions. And this is largely because of the unity of ASEAN. So that's the first point I think I get from this paper. The second point is that ASEAN, however, has become increasingly ineffective and to deal with the challenge of increasingly assertive China. And so that led to individual members take the self approach and to promote their interest and agenda. And that is evidenced by the three papers on the four individual countries' approach to the South China Sea, and they take each of them take different approach and to South China Sea. But the question is for me, and which is not clear, and by reading Chris's paper, is that will Chris in the end still recommend ASEAN should unify together, and then otherwise it cannot deal with China more effectively? That's a very non-controversial statement. But what I want to know is that Chris's assessment in the year ahead, and the ASEAN are more likely to be even more divided or become more unified in the current in the face of increasingly powerful and assertive China. So I will stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Tan, for having been a great discussant as well as speaker number 5. And we have a few more minutes, and let us open the floor. And what I would like for speakers to do is to respond at the last minute of this session. So by that time, I'd like to collect comments and questions. So please.
Bob Lowry. I'm just interested to see that you're only claiming 4 claimants, or people have disputes with China. In fact, there is a 5th, which we all know. And I'm wondering why that wasn't included. And it's very important because China's made a point of sending escorted fishing vessels there over several years to set the southern boundary of their claim. But more importantly, to knock Indonesia out in terms of being an effective leader within ASEAN or helping to solve this dispute, as well as the domestic issues you referred to before. So we've got to a situation now where essentially Indonesia is no longer the first amongst equals in ASEAN. We've got to a situation where China is the leader of the unequals in ASEAN, and Indonesia really is not able to play a central role in this. And it's not incidental that China has actually pressed this issue in the overlap between the two claims north of the Natuna Islands.
Please.
Thank you very much for your presentations. They are really interesting. I have my name is Kei Koga from the Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. I have one quick question to all of you. You touched on the several things about the ASEAN centrality and also ASEAN unity. I'm kind of wondering to what extent the two terms are important to kind of maintaining stability in South China Sea and also promoting the resolution in the South China Sea. The thing is because seems to me there are certain kind of unity already achieved. Like the ASEAN created this certain kind of documents, even though it's weak, like the DOC is weak, but still they actually have the certain degree of consensus. And even if we actually push further than that, then like what could we achieve? Like we've already achieved certain consensus, and then the still situation is actually to some extent deteriorating. And then so in what sense can we actually achieve if we achieve further ASEAN unity or ASEAN centrality? Thank you.
Thank you. This very interesting presentation. My name is Osamu Izawa at the Japanese Embassy. And I have a question to Dr. Choi. This is the concerning the relation with the United States. And according to your presentation, and Dr. Zhang explained the fears of the United States of the disengagement in this region. But according to your explanation, Vietnam has three no policies, and I think that prevents the Vietnam from developing the security cooperation with the United States. But recently, the Obama administration decided to lift the arms embargo against Vietnam. I think that this is a very good sign, the big sign of the goodwill of the United States government toward Vietnam. I think that is there any perspective from the Vietnamese side to gradually or step by step increase the security cooperation with the United States in the future? Thank you.
Professor Green.
Thank you. My question is for Professor Pitlo. I noticed you mentioned in your paper that former President Ramos has been tasked with negotiating with China. Kind of wondering, what can he possibly put on the table? But you might guess, I remember that President Ramos was the person who initiated the BIMPIAGA, the Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, East ASEAN Growth Area. Now, it's probably just my imagination, but is it possible that will be on the table? Thank you.
Yuan? Oh, please, Yuan first.
Thank you. Ewan Graham from the Lowy Institute. My question is also for Mr. Pitlo. The arbitration was understood in the Philippines case to be partly in response to feelings that ASEAN had not been sufficiently supportive of the Philippine claim, and the Cambodia debacle was uppermost in that. But among several wild cards in Philippine politics at the moment, the ASEAN chair will move to Philippines next year. Could you outline how ASEAN lies within Philippine thinking? How will Philippines use the chair to move forward in the South China Sea? Are there any indications of strategy either within the bureaucracy or to the extent that anyone can get inside President Duterte's headspace at that level too?
Thank you. The next question in the back.
Yes, my name is Thurit Lengs. I am a PhD student at UNSW. I would like to ask you, all the panelists, the questions about South China Sea issue, especially with regard to the Q, the code of, unexpected, encounter at sea, which is recently, I think we have that at the 28 and 29 ASEAN Summit and related summit in Laos. So do you think that, is it a good progress in terms of the management of the South China Sea issue? If we already have the cues, or is it the some kind of still we need something more to do with the code of conduct? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see no other questioners or comments, and since Indonesia has been mentioned, well, Dr. Mahibat, would you like to say something? I mean, before I give the floor to 4 speakers.
Thank you. I think most of the questions about Indonesia in ASEAN is probably the things I'm about to say in my presentation in the last session of today. So I'm probably not going to say much. But what I think I can say is that there's really high expectations for what Indonesia can actually do in the South China Sea. And looking at the current government and its focus on domestic development, some of these expectations are actually a bit irrational. I mean, if you look at the president is actually, I mean, foreign policy issues is certainly very low on his priority right now, and that reflects on most of the policies that the government has carried out so far since 2014. And this is a big challenge, that there are criticisms both from outside Indonesia and from within the country as well. And I guess I fully concur with this represents one of the weaknesses of ASEAN at the moment, that there is no clear leader. There is very little that Indonesia can actually do at the moment. And I think this reflects on the current ongoing problems that ASEAN is going through at the moment.
Thank you. Then let us start with Mr. Dania first.
Thank you, Ambassador. I guess I'll take the question on ASEAN unity and centrality by Kay and also Q's. Now, okay, while ASEAN is not a party to the dispute, it is, however, an interested party. The dispute concerns a body of water, the largest body of water within what is commonly known as the Southeast Asian region. It involves key member states and also key external dialogue partners, namely China and to a lesser extent the United States. While it would be difficult while it would be almost impossible to expect members of ASEAN who are not claimants to have the same view and the same understanding as those who do, it's still very important for ASEAN and its member states for all of them to largely be on the same page when it comes to the general concerns of the dispute. With regards to Q's, while I would say yes, it is progress, the question is it significant progress, or is it just a trickle of progress, or is it a question of one step forward and 3 steps back? That remains to be seen. I've heard contending arguments for both, but my conversations with some folks who were involved in the negotiations indicated that things could have been achieved a lot more faster and a lot more earlier. But nevertheless, we work with what we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Then Mr. Pitero, please.
Thank you for the good questions. Very interesting. I'll start with the question about the ASEAN centrality. So ASEAN, for the most part, had been criticized for just being a talk shop, coming up with statements. But even in recent years, even these statements are hard to come by, especially if statements would have some references on the South China Sea. So this demonstrates to what extent disunity or incohesiveness within ASEAN, how the South China Sea has been driving a wedge in the regional association. Having said that, I think a lot of positive developments had been made over the years, discussions, the DOC. But at the same time, we know for a fact that the DOC had been ineffective in preventing the intensification of disputes. Notably, the DOC made it very clear that occupation and building of artificial islands on previously unoccupied features is discouraged. But we know for a fact that it didn't fly. So I think it really hollows the institution of ASEAN as an effective player in these disputes. Perhaps in terms of economics, ASEAN can play a better role, but in terms of handling explosive issues like South China Sea, maybe ASEAN is not yet up to it. And if ASEAN would be forced to work on it, it may deepen cracks, which I hope it would not. The question about our former President Ramos playing a role in the Philippines-China issue with the South China Sea. Former President Ramos was the president at a time when the Mischief Reef incident happened in 95, 94. So it was the first time that the Philippines saw China really as an external threat, because this came about 2-3 years after we evicted the U.S. We terminated the U.S. bases agreement. So we thought that the environment post-Cold War is more conducive for peace and so on. And then years after, we have Chinese occupying one of our reefs, one of our features, the Mischief Reef, which we call Panganiban. So that is a watershed moment. We were able to manage the issue in the sense that it did not intensify, but the Mischief Reef is lost. We lost Mischief Reef. So there is some issue about his credentials. Former President Ramos' credentials in terms of discussing with China on this, having had this experience before. But President Ramos is also a very important person, eminent person, and he has been one of the leaders of the POAO Forum, the equivalent of Davos for Asia. And I think he will bring a lot of influence, experience, seasoned practice, and he is also coming there as an envoy of our president. And I believe that there was a schedule for him to go to Beijing after the initial talks in Hong Kong last August, but it was canceled for reasons not yet disclosed. You made mention of the BIMP IAGA, which he also championed while he was the president. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for cooperation on that front, because BIMP IAGA, the insular part of Southeast Asia, has always been like a backwater. If you would compare to Thailand, Vietnam, which is increasingly becoming connected to China in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative, railways, that part of Southeast Asia, southern Philippines, Brunei, Kalimantan of Borneo, Sabah, Sarawak, that has been largely less developed compared to mainland Southeast Asia. So there's a lot of opportunity in that. ASEAN Master Plan of Connectivity has two critical aspects. One is in the Mekong area, and then one is the ASEAN Railroad Network, which would connect us Kunming, Singapore Railway. It's already in the works. So the other part is the ASEAN RoRo network. This would connect a series of ports in that area, southern Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia. So this offers a lot of opportunities with Chinese financing in terms of port construction. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that, and also maritime security. This area of the Philippines has always been a national shame, in terms of transnational security, maritime piracy, kidnappings, and terrorism. So with the support of, I think, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, and possibly external partners as well, we'd be able to clamp down on these incidents and at the same time bring development in this area. On the issue of the arbitration and how the Philippines will move forward, considering that next year we would be the chair of ASEAN. If we would look at the recent visits of our president, it's more region-centric. He went to Laos, he went to Indonesia, he's now in Vietnam. There are talks that he would go to Beijing and Japan. So I think if we would look at all these developments, provided there will be no serious commotions from here up until our hosting of next year, I think holding everything constant, I think the issue of the South China Sea will be downplayed come 2017. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sweet.
Yeah, before answering some specific question to me, I just comment on the issue of looking at China as economic opportunity or not. I think from Vietnam perspective, Vietnam now try to diversify economic relation so that not depend on more on China. And I think Vietnam quite reluctant in promoting economic cooperation with China. The more commercial activity, the more deficit we have. On investment, quite reluctant because the environmental issue and labor issue, for example. So that's why Vietnam tried to diversify. We signed TPP and FTA with Korea, with other European countries, for example. On ASEAN centrality and unity role and their role in South China Sea, I think we cannot expect so-called cat keeping house. ASEAN cannot solve the South China Sea. What the role of ASEAN is just for providing forums for discussion, for engaging China in discussion, and to promote management of the South China Sea, not settlement of South China Sea. That is the role of QDOC or future COC. This document is not for settle the maritime dispute or territorial dispute in the South China Sea. Settlement must be through bilateral or multilateral channel, involve directly concerned party, or if they want, they can bring to arbitration for decide. So of course, ASEAN, we have diversity within unity, but more unity is better because it affects this unity can affect the image, credibility, and centrality role. But without unity, as we see, ASEAN could reach some agreement with China on some, I would call, symbolic documents. And specifically on the Q, for example, Q Code of Unalerted Encounter at Sea was adopted within the West Pacific Naval Symposium. So all the claimants, all the coastal states already members, and now they just repeat again that they will comply with the Q. So no more practical value added when ASEAN and China agree for that. If they expand, as ASEAN wish, expand the Q for Coast Guard, for law enforcement vessel or law enforcement flight plane, it's better to avoid incident at sea. Regarding whether Vietnam 3-no policy offers security cooperation with the U.S., Vietnam until now maintain a 3-no policy, no military allies, no military base within territory, and no go with one country against another countries. But that policy apply for peacetime. If we have a non-peaceful time, maybe the government have to adjust that policy. And this will not affect, I don't think it affects the security cooperation with other partners, including US, Japan, Australia, and other countries. And actually, within Vietnam and US, a lot of improvement in bilateral relationships in recent years, including on security aspects. And I think partly due to the shared concern about the environment, security environment in the region, about the uncertainty of China's rise. And as Isago mentioned, US lifted embargo to Vietnam. But from lifting embargo to promoting more practical cooperation, I think it requires time and a lot of interaction from both sides. Anyway, we can promote a lot of so-called non-sensitive area of cooperation, including surveillance, sharing information, law enforcement capacity building, and maybe not base, but more access is Vietnamese military base, in Cam Ranh base, for example. There's a lot of opportunity open for both sides. So,
thank you. Just quickly, because I think most or all the questions have been answered to one degree or another. With regard to Indonesia, I completely agree with Bob. So I have in the abstract there, it was more a case of fitting 5 sessions in one go. just didn't work. So I put the little caveat in the brochure saying it is a claimant state de facto, but we address it in a later session. But the EEZ, the continental EEZ, the Natuna gas field, all cross with the 9 dash line. On ASEAN unity, since Zhang asked, I think I share the opinions by and large of what have just been said. I would highlight, though, in terms of whether it's ASEAN's role or not, as the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, it's a duty of ASEAN to represent the interests of its own member states. So therefore, that's a pretty core component. Can it do so, which is Zhang's question. I think without institutional change, a change of approach in how the association deals with more controversial issues, especially the South China Sea issue, then it's not looking too bright at the moment. At least not beyond what I highlight in my paper, the general points of consensus, to move to a point where we can actually shift countries' cost-benefit analysis, leading to tangible change. Here I agree with Tui to the extent that ASEAN could contribute as one tool in a large toolkit. Again, that will need institutional change. Maybe a subcommittee, an ASEAN minus X, the countries that don't want to be a part, just stand aside. Let those countries that are willing to take a position on international law, on the regional order, on how countries should behave and be an example as a major power in the global order, that would then be up to them. Whether ASEAN can take that next step in its evolution, I also have concerns. But thank you very much.
Thank you all.